I'm Dr. Bahia Muhammad, Assistant Professor of Criminology at Howard University in the Department of Sociology and Criminology. I am so excited to welcome you all to the conference, but more importantly, to give you access to the research team in our conversations. We really felt that it was important as we began to disseminate the findings of this particular research study to allow more individuals to see what goes on behind the scenes after we analyze data, once we sit down and interview individuals specifically. So just to give you a couple of reminders, this was a qualitative study that incorporated mixed methodology, so to speak. The majority of interviews lasted between 1.5 hours to 2.5 hours at times. And so we really engaged in an intimate dialogue with children of incarcerated parents across the nation. We had a sample of 100 individuals that we were able to draw from. And originally we started with face-to-face interviews, and after COVID-19 hit us all, we were able to advance the study to utilize technology to have virtual interviews. But we would like you to know that although we adopted virtual methodology, the interviews were still very rich and incorporated so many themes. Oftentimes, when researchers conduct studies in this area and others, oftentimes you will read a report and not have access to the conversations. And we thought, as it relates to shifting the paradigm and changing the conversation around children of incarcerated parents, it is very important now, more so than ever, to assure that much research is done in this area. And so we really wanted to make sure that you all had access to the amazing conversations that the research team has embarked in across the life of this particular study. Today's session, we're going to be talking about definitions of success. We thought that this was very important because the study itself rests itself on the lived experiences of resiliency among children of incarcerated parents. Oftentimes, as researchers, we define through theoretical frameworks the definitions that individuals embed the research within. For this particular study, we adopted a grounded approach. We thought that that was important because the children themselves are the closest to the problem, and therefore, we adopt the methodology for allowing them to guide us to the solution. With that being said, I want to give you all a bit of background on the specific questions that we asked during the study. What I will do for this particular session is to read those studies off, and then the research team and myself will engage you in a dialogue around our findings from our particular interviews. When we looked at success, again, we thought it was very important for the individuals who we were interviewing to define it for themselves. One of the first questions that we asked, what is your definition of success and how would you define it? Do you think that your personal definition of success is different than the status quo definition of success or the general definition of success? What does it mean to be successful? We oftentimes talk about success, but what does it mean to each individual? Because success could definitely mean something different to each individual. What resources or supports did each individual have to help them down this path towards success? What did they consider successful for themselves? When did they determine that they were on a path of success? Was this something that they just, were pushed into? Was it something that their families forced them to do where they felt that they didn't have a definition or that they had a choice in the matter at all? We also wanted to know what resources they had and if they felt that they were on the road to success or they actually were successful. 3 additional questions are, how did your path towards success begin? And how did you know? What examples of success did you have around you? And then we ended that with going into definitions of success from the particular individuals, where oftentimes they define the top 5 successes. So again, you can see there were a lot of robust questions. Not every individual answered each and every question fully and in detail, but we want to allow you to just hear some of the themes that came about in our study. And I'll start by just talking briefly about definitions of success. We did find overall in the majority of interviews that individuals did have their own definitions of success, and they dovetailed away from the status quo definitions of success. And again, when we get into the discussion section of this particular study, we will give particular reasons around why we felt that was the case. But for today, we're going to just engage you in a dialogue around success. I want to give you an opportunity to hear from the research team in terms of their definitions of success as it related to their particular interviews. And I will start with you, Sydney. If you could just briefly introduce yourself and then share a bit of the interviews that stood out for you prior to our dialogue.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sydney Turner. I am a second-year master's student at Howard University, as well as a research assistant on this particular study. In regards to the definitions of success that I found as far as the subjects went, majority of the subjects define success as having peace within themselves, being able to sleep at night and knowing that they don't have something stressful going on, being able to be within their right mind. A lot of mental illness has been coming around with these individuals. They witnessed family members having mental illness, and they just realized that, wow, I was able to turn 40 years old and I'm in my right mind, you know? So majority said they found peace within themselves and define success as being able to give back to others, being able to give back within their community. So most of them wanted to say that they felt like if they had an influence on other people, then that was defined as success. They didn't really focus on the status quo of, oh, I have $1 million, I'm able to have a full-time job, not the materialistic things that the American society places a huge emphasis on to deem someone as successful. Internal peace was what they defined as success. So
thank you for that. Dr. Gatewood?
Yeah, so I'm Dr. Brittany Gatewood. I am the project director for the study. And I want to piggyback on a lot of what Sydney said and Dr. Muhammad said, that they've created their own definitions of success. But one thing I really found interesting is the fact of things that we categorize as success, such as like schooling or having a job, they didn't see that as successful, right? They didn't see that they were a success story. They're just like, I'm just doing this, like, or this is just something that I wanted to do and I accomplished. And so they don't necessarily, they're very humble. A lot of the participants are very humble, like, you know, this is just something I needed to do, and not, they don't necessarily think of themselves as going outside of the statistics of Black people in general when it comes to schooling, job, and all these other negative metrics that usually occur. And they also see success as them accomplishing just goals that they had, like just baseline goals. Like one participant who had a lot of mental illness and other things in their background, they're just like, I woke up today. That is a success in itself, you know, or I'm able to do these things on my own because I have these diagnoses. Or education was a big one. People saying, you know, I get, and a lot of things that I think the other two would agree, like, I guess this is successful. Like, I guess this is I guess you could say this is successful. I've never thought about it. So I think a lot of the participants just never thought about how they are successful, or like even attaching the word success to them. Even if they still live in the quote unquote hood, or even if they didn't accomplish these status quo things, they still have a lot of accomplishment that a lot of people don't have. And they just sometimes don't even see themselves as like, they accomplish these big goals. Even graduating high school or not going back into the system, majority did not have any run-ins with the criminal justice system, even though all statistics say that they're more likely to. Because I think maybe none of my participants that I interviewed, maybe one might have done, but like outside of that, all of them did not have any run-ins with the police or the criminal justice system, which is at baseline a success for children of incarcerated parents, because that is the metric that all the research does, is basing on, are you going back into the system? And so that's kind of an overview of what I saw interesting within these studies.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you said that, Dr. Gateway. Thank you so much for that. It definitely reminds me of all of these interviews that we've done across the nation. And one of the things that I think is really important in terms of connecting to what you talked about is that in the research, it defines success as not going to prison, not getting arrested. And so we really have these really dry kind of negative definitions of success attributed to the children. And it's clear from this particular study and the findings in which we all agree that in speaking with the children, one, they can speak for themselves. Right. Two, they are definitely able to define robustly how they define success. And, you know, who would think that waking up the next morning is a big success? But imagine, you know, a young child seeing their parent violently arrest. Right now, we're going through a lot of social injustices and unrest playing itself out loud, you know, in the streets. And so that means, you know, possibly that there will be more individuals who are arrested and therefore more eyes of children that see it. How can you sleep at night over that? You know, just to have to wake up in the morning is an accomplishment. And there aren't really a lot of articles, if any at all, out there that talk about that. You know, oftentimes we think about those things as small things, you know, like life. You know, we take life for granted. And, you know, just waking up the next morning after experiencing any trauma is a success. And it is the interviews that we, you know, conducted that remind me of that. Not only were these children steering away from the criminal justice system, which is unique and significant in and of its own, because a lot of the communities that they described were plagued with, you know, an intense presence of law enforcement, low socioeconomic status and things of that sort. So we know navigating around law enforcement can definitely be a difficult thing in these communities, and they didn't experience that. So oftentimes when we hear about the 1 in 3 Black males that, you know, will experience parental incarceration, oftentimes the definition is just limited to that. If you don't go to prison, you are a success. But there are a lot more things that go into that, like you talked about, Sydney, in terms of peace. I want to talk a little bit more about that, because some of the things that led to these pathways to success were the children being told the truth and knowing where their parents were, regardless of if they made the decision to engage with them or not. Just knowing where they were gave a sense of peace. And so if we know that children define success as having internal peace, then that also means that we need to start governing in programs and social services that allow these children to have that peace. And knowing the truth of where their parents are and being able to ask questions can oftentimes lead to that success, so to speak. It's pretty interesting. Do you want to add anything to that, Sydney?
Yeah, I did want to add something, because I'm reading a quote, and I quote, "I think healing, I think peace. I think more than anything, what success has looked like for me is owning the fullness of who I am and not being deterred by either situation out of my control or my own personal shortcomings." So having that conversation to let the children know where their parents are, not lying to them, will allow them to begin the healing process, which eventually turns into having internal peace. So giving that child the opportunity to mentally process what's going on, express their feelings, because sometimes people and parents try to just write their children off. Oh, they're too young. Oh, they don't know what's going on. When in actuality, children are very smart. They pick up on things a lot. They know that their parent is not there. They know that, oh, the lie is, oh, they're in the military. Oh, they work for the government. Oh, they're gone. But no, their child needs to be able to know where exactly their parent is so they can process it fully, sit down, have a meaningful conversation so they can express their feelings, and then begin to have the healing process. Because having your parent go be incarcerated is traumatic in itself, just in general. It's a very traumatic experience, regardless of what age that child may be. It's just a very traumatic experience. So being able to have that conversation with that child and let them know the full truth so they can sit in it and actually feel those feelings instead of writing it off and just letting them think that is not incarcerated, you know, so they need that healing to then eventually have that internal peace, which will then make them become more successful in the end. So
yeah, and it's interesting because when you think about it from the perspective of defining success only connected to parental incarceration, you know, so dehumanizing the population and only connecting them to this experience of having a parent in prison, which we know they are, you know, way more holistic than that. But one of the things that is interesting for me, and I'm going to look a little deeper into this as we begin to continue this analysis phase, is that with those negative definitions of success, it causes more stigma and shame. So a caregiver can't be successful, so to speak, in terms of sharing the truth, because that truth ultimately, you think, can lead them down that path to going to prison. But if you think about success in the way that the children of incarcerated parents are defining it themselves, it's just like, let me sit down and figure out how to tell the truth. Let's have this conversation so that we can brainstorm and work together about this. So it kind of gets rid of that enforced silence that they talk about in the data a lot. And it really allows for individuals to get rid of this conspiracy of silence. Oh, you know, we have to be, you know, really silent about it, because what the children of incarcerated parents are letting us know now through their own narratives and their own voices is that I feel peace inside when I know where my parent is, when I'm able to ask questions about it. And, you know, as we get into more of the study later on during, you know, session 2 and day 3, the children who were connected to their incarcerated parents were not only able to be empowered and strengthened, but the incarcerated parent was a huge battery in their backs for helping them stay on that path to success. So imagine what you're missing out on when a parent can serve in such an inspirational way. Again, we would have known none of this if we didn't allow the children to, 1, define success for themselves, and 2, be able to speak for themselves. What are some of the resources that children talked about in the interviews with you all in terms of being able to maintain success or being able to be pushed and propelled into success in terms of things that were available to them?
Well, in my experience with the interviews, one thing that came up a lot that we don't talk about is therapy. So a lot of the people that I interviewed went to therapy or have therapists. And so in a lot of the women that were interviewed had sexual trauma or those type of things that have happened in their past. And so one thing that propels them to success is trying to address their trauma, which in like mental health and stuff is very stigmatized within the Black community. But it seems like these children of incarcerated parents are like, let me go full on and address these issues so I can get better. And so there was a lot of, yes, I go to therapy. I'm glad I went. It helps me address, you know, X, Y, and Z. I had one participant that used a lot of community supports, whether it would be like community organizations or mental health organizations that were in the community to help them out. And also, as Dr. Muhammad was saying, just their parents in general. And so we, you know, eventually we'll talk about more parenting, but when in terms of success, the parents did as much as they could on the inside to help their children be successful. So knowing that they had a test or helping them study when they came to visit or, you know, those type of things, it's like they were always their champions. Like, okay, you're going to do this. We want you to be successful. And so the research and all these kind of things saying that the parents aren't involved or being connected with the parents are negative, most of the children are like, that was the positive, right? And even Dr. Muhammad was talking about, you know, the silence of not telling kids. Most of the kids are like, we knew because our friends' parents were in. Like, they're in neighborhoods where you have this collateral damage of all, you know, this mass incarceration. And so the kids know. So trying to, you know, sugarcoat like, oh, they're here, is like the kids know because their friend's dad. And so a lot of my interviewees talked about their connections with their friends, and you know, their friends will talk about, you know, this happened with my dad, this happened with my mom, and these type of things, and they have these kind of conversations, and it also helps them to have support systems to help them become more successful. And so when talking about the success of these children of incarcerated parents, it's like parents are very tools for help them to be successful. They're not hindering them as people think. And a lot of their parents, it seems like the parents on the inside very much told them what it was and didn't sugarcoat things and didn't sell them a fairy tale. So they knew what they were getting into. They knew this is how life was and prepared them in those ways, which also helped them in the long run to address some of these issues and like be more fearless, a lot more like, you know, they're not scared of a lot, you know, they take the risk. And I think their relationship with their parents had a lot to do with that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. There's so much that we can say. We're really hoping that you all maintain your connections to the website and that you participate in all 3 days. I mean, this is part of the Dr. Muhammad experience and really trying to get research hot off the press out there to the communities, to those individuals that are affected, to those, you know, children that are struggling with their own narratives that could, you know, click on a video and be empowered, as opposed to waiting for the draconian, you know, methodology of waiting 5 years for, you know, a book to come out, or, you know, a year and a half for a journal publication to go through the editing process. We want to show that this is the way that research should continue to be. It should be alive and it should be shared during that phase. As you guys can see from this conversation, there's a lot to be learned. We will have a white paper that is produced at the end of the study, which will continue to go on for a couple of months. But this conference really is a way for you to be able to identify and experience through experiential conference proceedings and engagement to understand the research and become intimate with it in the same way that we did as a research team. One of the things that I want to give you all an opportunity to do in our closing out, because we only want to keep this to the 15 minutes that's allotted for the break in the conference, is to just share some advice that you have for scholars as it relates to some of the findings that we're talking about. What should they be thinking about? How can they advance their research in this area? What do you want to see in terms of future research around this particular population, specifically centering the voices of Black children of incarcerated parents around resilience, success, and triumphs?
So as far as future research, I feel like we are one of the first to focus on the actual positive aspects. All of the existing literature always focuses on that negative connotation. Going within the criminal justice system and mass incarceration, you're always thinking about the negative aspects. However, like you will see in this study, these children are successful. They hold PhDs, they have their own nonprofits, they're giving back to their community. So really highlighting that positive aspect and stepping away from the negative statistics to say that these children will be just like their parents and they will go back into the system, that we're changing the narrative, we're flipping the script, go away from that negative aspect and focus on the positive so we can continue to uplift this particular community, show them this is the road that others who've been in your same situation or maybe even worse, they were able to overcome this, and highlight the success and the path that led them to become resilient adults that they are today. So just mainly focusing on the positive, stepping away from the negative to change the narrative and let these others know that it's possible that they can become successful as well.
Right.
Yes, I would agree with Sydney, and I would add that, especially when you talk about the field of criminology, most of the criminological theories that exist based on, especially middle class values, right? Mm-hmm. And so those are what we strive for. That's what success is. You have money, you have all these things. And just to know, especially when we talk about Black children of incarcerated parents, mm-hmm. the cultural differences, that there are cultural differences of how families and communities operate. We operate differently than other races and ethnicities. And so you have to take that into consideration, and what our baselines are, what we consider successful or what we consider resilient might be different. And the fact that they don't match up with those mainstream does not take away from the success that they're having. And so a lot of criminology folks, starts at the baseline of criminalizing Black people. And if you start at that baseline of criminalizing, everything that is done is going to start with the negative. And so looking at, with this whole Black Lives Matter is the fact of like, okay, look at Black people as humans, right? Are you putting these Black incarcerated children at the same standard of the whites, or are you putting them at a less standard, right? And so there's a lot of people within the study, and hopefully within future studies that are done, that are way different than what these mainstream scholars say we are, or say these children are. And so focusing on, your implicit bias when it comes to the research, because if you come in with the bias, you're automatically going to think the negative. And maybe waking up every day isn't enough for your definition of success. But if someone's in a neighborhood where that is a success, you have to take that into consideration, not just because they don't have this of the socioeconomic status, because they don't have this GPA, but if they have a 3.5 in a school that, is under-resourced, that is different than if you're going to this private school. So just trying to, researchers, when talking about success with this population, check your biases and check where your intentionality is coming from. And if you're starting at a negative place, then your research is going to automatically put a negative light on this community.
Yes, thank you
Woo!
for that.
Speak on it, Dr. Gatewood.
Yeah, definitely. That was so good. And I mean, when you do the research, I mean, it's just there. And, just in doing the interviews, I would let individuals know out there, this is nothing to be afraid of. Oftentimes people ask me, how do you research that population? Oh my God, how do you deal with what you hear? And I asked them to explain a little bit more, because I was a Black child, and I'm a Black woman. And so I want to know what they're talking about in the sense of the stories that they just project to be negative because you live in a low socioeconomic area. You have 9 brothers and sisters by a single mother. And so life has to be horrible. It has to be traumatic. Oh my God, how do you deal with that? And it's so interesting that I've just been so empowered by doing these interviews across the nation and seeing the faces. We know that children of incarcerated parents are a hidden population historically and currently. And oftentimes, because it's a hidden population, you never see the face. And the statistic becomes the face. So, the school to prison pipeline is something that's in your mind and it's scaring you. You automatically assume that this population is, gonna fill the new prison beds. And so for me to see these beautiful Black faces and voices from all across the nation has empowered me and charged me in a way that would have never happened otherwise. I also want researchers to understand that there's a lot to learn from flipping the coin and looking at it from a place of success and resilience. Oftentimes I get individuals who I think are coming from good places, and even if they're not, who cares? But they come with this sort of a narrative to say that, we've got this far with children of incarcerated parents by leaning in on the detriments and the negative things that they experience. And they say to me, oftentimes, the majority of the story is not going to be positive. And, I step back and I, give that kind of a smile to basically say that, how do you know that when the statistic says 1 in 3? And when you are saying 1 in 3, that means 2 individuals have a chance of success. That is more than 1. I'll repeat it again. When you say the 1 in 3 greater odds ratio, that means that 1 individual possibly will have a time or a stint in the criminal justice system and 2 will not. 2 is more than 1. So please, this is a public service announcement. Stop focusing on the negativity. We know enough about the negative nature. And just from this short dialogue with the research team, it is clear to us, and it should be clear to you, that we have a lot to learn from looking at it from the sunnier side of things. And it's not being soft on crime. Oftentimes individuals say, you're being soft on crime. You want us to lock individuals up and throw away the key. The children of incarcerated parents are not incarcerated themselves. I'll repeat, the children of incarcerated parents are not incarcerated themselves, and they should not be defined by the greatest mistake that their parents have made. If you want to hear more about that, please check out my TED Talk, Does the Apple Fall Far from Prison? Thank you so much for tuning in, and we hope to have you for the full day of our conference today. And again, please don't be afraid to look at the positive nature of children of incarcerated parents, because oftentimes when we think about the statistics, in the back of our minds, we are envisioning Black children, brown children, and those children have a story of success as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.